first thing that we need to do to get the ball rolling on this project is go to SpeedTree, and you'll need to download the 9 different trees. I think there's actually 10, but for this course we're using 9 of them, and you can access them via the SpeedTree Cinema library. I think in total it came to about $110, but the great thing about this is that it might seem kind of expensive, particularly for students. But the great thing is that you can reuse these assets over and over again. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a folder structure that allows us to reuse these same assets over and over again for every single project in future. And basically any project that uses trees. And not only that, we're going to set up our shaders in the way that can be quite literally copy and pasted from one scene to another without having to update any file paths, which is really cool. So once you've downloaded the tree packs, I'm going to go to my hard drive, and I've created a folder on my hard drive called Digital Assets Library. And this is a folder that I don't really want to move. I always want it to live in the same location. So I'd advise creating a folder in a location where you're not going to move. You always want to be able to access this folder on every single project. So I'd recommend sort of finding a good spot to put that folder and leave it there. So with that said, I created a Digital Assets Library folder. Let's jump inside. I created a folder called Trees. And let's say, for example, I had kitchen appliances. I'd put a folder in here called Kitchen Appliances. Appliances. And all my sort of assets would go inside here. And it's just a really nice way of staying organized, and everything's accessible on different projects. Okay, so with that said, so I created the trees folder, jump inside. I created a folder called African, so just the type of tree that it is. You know, you could create ones in here called Europe, or European, Asian, for example. And maybe we'll just keep the same naming conventions. Okay, so inside African, this has all of the folders that I've downloaded from SpeedTree. So this is what they'll look like. They'll come as zip folders, so you just have to unzip the folders, copy and paste this into this location. And I keep the zip folders just in case if I accidentally delete or save over any of these files. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is jump into SpeedTree, and we're going to process these trees. We're going to export the meshes out. We're going to break down each model into 2 different OBJ meshes, leaves and like main trunk and branches. I've just opened up SpeedTree. Let's load in those trees. So let's go back out to the Trees African folder, and the first one we're going to load in is the Acacia Jungle, and we're going to work our way down to the bottom here. So we're going to use 9 trees in total. I wouldn't bother using the Acacia Fallen. That tree, in my opinion, is not very good because it doesn't collide properly with the ground. It's sort of intersecting and going through, which is not very good. And the Acacia Canopy tree is one that we created in the model an African Acacia tree in SpeedTree, which is actually free for you guys to check out. Okay, so with that said, let's jump into the Acacia Jungle 1. Let's drop this SPM file into SpeedTree. In each of these folders in here, I'm going to create an OBJ folder, and this is where we're going to save our meshes out to. And we're going to create one OBJ folder for each of these trees. So the first thing we need to do is drag over the tree, and we're going to change the branches and caps to quads, subdivisions to quads, and leave the mesh or the leaves and fronds to triangles. If you click Control 2 on the keyboard, you might have to click it twice. then you can see what the model's currently looking like. Control 1 to go back out. Okay. Let's select over all of the bark. And this is how we're going to basically texture and shade this in Houdini. We're going to create one bark material for the bark and then a leaf material for the leaves. So it makes sense to separate these out into two different objects. So when they're all selected, I've got a file, export selected as mesh. I'll go back out to the folder, so Acacia Jungle 1, Acacia Jungle, OBJ, and we'll rename this to Acacia Jungle 1 _ main. And just main sort of stands for, or it's a naming convention that I use that stands for the trunk and the branches together. So make sure you've got wavefront OBJ ticked, click accept, and we'll skip the texture save. We don't want to save any textures out. We're going to load those into Houdini later on. Hierarchy 0 to all, and scale to 1, swap Y and Z. Just click export. I'm going to do exactly the same for the leaves, so select all those, file, export selected as mesh, and inside of here, we're going to change this from main to leaves. Exactly the same settings, and you want to repeat that for the other 8 trees. Let's browse for the Acacia Savanna 1. Let's load that in. The reason I've chosen to show you guys how to export this particular tree is because this tree has multiple different variations of leaves. So we need to export each leaf type into its own OBJ. So as we did before, quads will leave the leaves as triangles. And you can see here that these ones are the batch ones. There you go, we'll file, export, selected as mesh. We'll find the crap folder, Savanna 1, OBJ, and we'll rename this to batched leaves. Like that. We'll make sure the hierarchy is ticked for 0 to all, just as we did in the previous video. Wait for that to export. We'll do the clustered leaves. I don't think that anchor one is doing anything. Cluster, that's not doing anything either. File, export selected as mesh, and we'll rename that to clustered leaves. Same settings. Wait for it to load. Select all the bark. Export selected. And we'll rename that as we did earlier to main for the trunk and the branches. And there's multiple ways of exporting these assets, but that's just the way that I prefer. Let's open up the palm tree as well, which is a template that SpeedTree provide. I use that one, it's pretty cool. We'll do exactly the same. And before we do all that, we'll make sure we tick quads. Let's call that one palm. You can see it can actually be quite fast processing this. Once you've done one or two, the rest are nice and quick.